So we're going to walk through the frequently made mistakes for assignment 2A. And some of these things are fairly straightforward to fix. Other ones take a bit more thought. First of all, please make sure you document your code. And let me put line by line, and we'll talk about what that means here in a second. Please also make sure that you run the unit tests. So there were a lot of people did very well, so great job. For the people who did not do very well, inevitably, many of the problems that you ran across would have been detected by running the unit tests. So please make sure you're running the unit tests. That will help you enormous amount. So let's take a look at perform crawl. So please don't have if statements just sitting out by themselves. If you watch the walkthrough video of the specification, I said, try to avoid using if statements or for loops whenever you possibly can. There really shouldn't be a need to have them here at all. So these kinds of conditional checks need to be integrated into the filter calls that you're doing. Here's another problem. Please don't have your code chained together in a straight line running off the edge of the page. I omitted some of the code here, but the original code was running off the edge of the page. That just makes it hard to read. And secondly, it makes it hard to document. So a much better way to document it is to, put something here, explain what you're doing, then go over here, explain what you're doing. So that approach scales very nicely because number one, you're not running off the right-hand side of the page. And number two, you're able to see at a glance what you're documenting. You're documenting each of the operations line by line. So that's a very, 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 very good habit to get into. Definitely do not try to cram everything on one line. It makes it next to impossible to read what's going on. And then secondly, please make sure you use the find first or else convention as opposed to using reduce or something else. And there's an explanation of the rationale behind that if you take a look at that Piazza posting that I did explaining the rationale for that. So just this code isn't necessarily wrong. It's just somewhat confusing to use reduce in this context. Some other things, don't put terminal operations like find first so early in the stream. That needs to go much, much later in the stream, basically at the end or near the end. This particular condition expression is backwards from what it is in the sequential loops crawler. So the first thing we do is we check to see if the depth has been exceeded. And if the depth has not been exceeded, then we go ahead and see if we've already seen that URI. And there's a reason for doing it in that order, because if the depth has been exceeded, we don't want to waste time trying to put something in the URI because it's clearly not going to matter because we've already exceeded the depth. So calling put if absent is a more expensive call than checking to see if the depth is less than or equal to the max depth. So do that one first. And then I recommend, wherever possible, not putting in open, close, curly brace stuff. It just makes it more complicated than it needs to be. And you have to make sure you put a return statement. And I don't even know if this code is correct because it doesn't have a return statement, et cetera, et cetera. So you don't need to have unnecessary curly braces. Some other issues here. Please be consistent and use stream of to start the ball rolling. So you're going to do stream of to omit the page URI just to make everything streamified. So you don't have to create an array list and add the page URI to the array list. That's kind of like, speaking in French and Spanish and English in the same sentence, right? It's confusing different paradigms, and we're trying to stick with one paradigm, which is the streams paradigm. So in this case, please also combine the two filter calls into one. That's really a minor point. You could leave it this way. It's not the end of the world, but it's probably a little bit cleaner to do it that way. It'll also probably run ever so faster in some circumstances because it won't be going through that extra filter call. Again, please use stream of instead of using arrays as list here. And this particular code left out a lot of the logic. So, please make sure you're thinking through the steps that need to be done so that your code will compile and, most importantly, pass the unit tests. Continuing on with some mistakes that appeared with crawl page, please use method references as opposed to lambda expressions wherever possible. Your compiler will probably tell you that in many circumstances. If you write your code properly, it'll give you a helpful message and say, hey, please use a method reference here. It'll even convert it for you, in fact, automatically. And it's a good habit to get into to use objects ::non-null as a method reference rather than checking to see if the value is null. Just a little cleaner, a little bit more self-documenting, if you will. And in this case, please replace the use of sum with find first and or else. Again, because we only have one page we're looking at, it just seems a little weird to sum it, because you think of summing as summing a stream of things, whereas we're just doing the first one. Again, it's not the end of the world to do sum, it's just a little cleaner. Again, here we go. Please use a method reference instead of a lambda for map. And I'm not really sure what filter is being used for in this case, but it's probably not right. So please don't do that. And please replace the use of reduce and sum. Sorry, please replace the use of reduce with sum, which is a cleaner way. If you think about what sum is, it's basically doing reduce. It's just more clear at a glance what it's doing. This code didn't really make a lot of sense. I wasn't sure what was going on, but there needs to be more things going on here. Once again, please chain everything together. Don't define a local variable called list. Just start out by saying, page.getElements.stream.map to int, et cetera, et cetera. And down here, I recommend using the ternary operator instead of a switch statement or instead of an if-else statement, for the main reason, because if you use the ternary operator, then you can get by with less syntax. You don't have to put the open and close curly brace. You don't have to put the switch or the case or the if-else or the return or the open curly brace and close curly brace. It's just a lot more concise. And also, please replace reduce with sum in this particular case again. Once again, please don't put things together with a local variable, but instead stream it the way stream's intended. And in this case, don't use for each, but instead use map to int and sum. I think there's a bunch of problems with this code because it's not returning the values properly. It's just not doing what we want it to do. Oh yeah, there's also the problem. We don't want to be returning list.size. This is also, so we want to be using map to int and sum here. Much cleaner way to do it, much more functional way to do it. Let's look down at some more process image problems. Please use a method reference instead of a lambda for map. Please use objects non-null instead of a lambda expression for filter. Please don't write all your code in a straight line that goes off the end of the page because it's hard to read and it doesn't scale and you can't document it easily. And please also, take a look and see what you should be doing here instead of calling reduce. There's something else you could be doing instead, which is a little cleaner, using find first and or else. Now we're looking into transform image. I wasn't really sure what was going on here, but we don't want to be using drop while. We don't want to be using arrays as list image. Not sure what that's doing. Didn't make much sense, but we don't need to do it. We should be using streams. I think this code here will call itself an infinite recursion because it's calling map with transform image, which is not what you want to do because I think it'll recurse or something horrible will happen. Please use objects non-null instead of what's shown here. And you don't need to use collect at all. You need to use count instead. And let's see, I think we're getting towards the end here. This is another problem. Don't use the one element array hack. I used that. I actually took it out of my skeleton for the sequential loops crawler. I didn't like it. It's just a bad thing to have to do it that way. It's ugly. And instead, you want to use the count terminal operation instead of the for each terminal operation. That will fix the problem in this particular case. Okay, so that's a summary of the problems that I saw when I reviewed people's code for assignment 2A. So please make sure you fix all these problems before you start on assignment 2B, because you'll have to make the sequential streams crawler work properly for assignment 2B. And once you get it working, it's pretty trivial to update the parallel streams crawler or to take your sequential streams crawler and update it and integrate it to the parallel streams crawler and only a few things will have to change.